most of the world is running on an outdated paradigm, and it's causing a lot of suffering and confusion. This is a big idea that has been knocking around in my head for a long time, and that now has come the time to finally share. This is the idea of the abundance problem. The idea of we are heading into a world that is post-scarcity. In fact, the post-scarcity world has already been unfolding, is already here in many ways, is happening on many levels. And by and large, we are ill prepared for this. We have gone from suffering from scarcity to suffering from abundance, which in some ways is an amazing success. It's an amazing success story for humanity. But unless we adapt, unless we update some of our cultural values, some of our behaviors, unless our beliefs and our minds catch up to this abundance, it's actually going to cause a lot of problems, and it could lead to self-destruction, especially on an individual level. This is especially true for individual suffering. Now, when I talk about abundance, when I propose that we are leaving scarcity behind, that we are living in a post-scarcity world, that we have enough, if not too much, of everything, I know that brings up a lot of objections. And some people might feel almost insulted by this. Can't you see all the problems in the world? Don't you know that there are people suffering from poverty? Don't you know that we have so many problems in the world? How can you propose that everything is fine? But saying that we live in an era of abundance is not the same as saying everything is fine. So if you're skeptical here, in fact, especially if you're skeptical here, bear with me for a moment. Because I think this is one of the traps, this is one of the problems, is that we are suffering so many of these consequences, so many of these issues, because there's also a denial of this happening. So one idea here that we need to talk about right away is the idea that the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So what does this mean? Think of a futuristic city. Like if you just type futuristic city and look at the image results, or you go to some chatbot or Midjourney or whatever, and you say, create an image of a futuristic city, what will you get? You will get this sci-fi thing with, gleaming towers and flying cars and so on. And you can also think of many sci-fi movies or Star Trek or something like that. But this is what we tend to think of. The future looks like this. And clearly, we're not there yet. But the funny thing is, if you actually take a closer look at this, there's something odd about the picture of that futuristic city, which is that the entire city, for it to look like this, the entire city has to be built in the future. And real cities don't work like that. If you look at a real city, a real modern city, there are going to be some modern-looking tall towers, gleaming buildings, this kind of thing. And then if you keep looking a little bit, there are some older buildings, and there's some buildings that are decades old, and then there's some buildings that are centuries old. And depending on where in the world you are, there might be entire parts of the town that are centuries old, that are basically from the medieval times. There might even be some ruins still standing from thousands of years ago. And that's all in the same city. Just because we have invented the technology to build a skyscraper with solar panels on the roof doesn't mean that immediately the entire city gets upgraded to skyscrapers with solar panels on the roof. The latest, newest, most expensive building might be like that, but all the rest is still as it was before. And some of the new technology gets distributed out into the older parts of the city. So you might see solar panels pop up on some of the roofs of the older buildings. You might see air conditioning units get installed in older buildings and so on. But that distribution, it kind of trickles out slowly. And this is just a simple idea of like, just because a new technology exists, just because a problem has been solved, doesn't mean that that technology is everywhere or the solution is everywhere all at once. It's still a distribution problem. This distribution problem is really evident when you travel. Because depending on where you travel, it sometimes feels like you are being transported back in time. You can go visit a metropolis and sometimes feel like you're being transported slightly into the future. But then you might only be a few hours driving into the countryside away from feeling like you're moving back decades into the past. And even from country to country, there are some countries that are essentially existing in the past in terms of their technology, in terms of infrastructure, and so on. And different places and different countries are catching up at different speeds. So that's the idea of the future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed. This is happening across the board. And what I'm talking about here is what is happening on the pioneering edge, so to speak. Where are we heading? And I'm talking less about what is happening on the lagging end of that distribution. Overall, I'm going to confess I'm very optimistic, and I know that makes some people really angry, but I'm very optimistic. Yes, there are still many, many problems with poverty and the lack of access to good health care and so on and so forth. But the way I see it, we are well on the way of solving that problem. The distribution is happening, and it's important that it keeps happening, and I think it will keep happening. I think on some of the most important metrics, we've been doing extremely well, and that's things like overall child mortality has just gone down so much. Even the chances of an average person dying in violent conflict has been downtrending for a long time. And I'm also referring to some of Hans Rosling's data, or at least the data he compiled for his work and his books. It is the poorest cohorts of humanity that have made the greatest gains in wealth. So even though they're still poor compared to, let's say, the middle-class American, the gains they've made in the past decades, they went from extremely poor and starving to poor but making it. And that is a huge gain. So overall, when it comes to the distribution of abundance and the elimination of scarcity, I think we're on a really good track. So with that said, let's talk about what's happening on the leading edge of this, which is to say in industrialized, relatively well-off countries. This is where we are seeing the problems of abundance starting to outstrip the problems of scarcity. Maybe the simplest example of this is that nowadays it is more common for someone to either die or suffer health issues and complications from obesity than from starvation. And actually, I think obesity is too narrow a definition here, because the problems caused by too many calories and the wrong kinds of calories packaged and distributed in a way that is highly addictive and very cheap, those problems outweigh the problems of I don't have enough calories. I think what many of us are missing, and what on a cultural level all of us are missing, is that humanity as a whole has created an absolute miracle machine of abundance, and it's kind of running haywire, and we don't have an alternative solution. We don't know anything other than using the miracle machine to produce more stuff and ship it to more people. And there are many problems we have to deal with that cannot be solved by this miracle machine. We have become overly reliant on the miracle machine. The miracle machine that I'm referring to could also be called capitalism, although I think that's too narrow a definition. The miracle machine is what we have created as a result of incredible human coordination at mind-boggling scales. Consider this. I can pull out my phone right now and I can order, let's say, my favorite flavor of cheesecake. And I can have my favorite flavor of cheesecake delivered to my doorstep relatively quickly. If I'm living in a big city, probably in a matter of like half an hour or less. And if I'm living not in a hub of, cheesecake abundance choice, it might take like a day or so, right? I might have to order it from somewhere where it gets shipped overnight. But almost no matter where I am in the developed world, I can get my favorite flavor of cheesecake delivered to my doorstep pretty damn quickly, and it's not going to cost that much money either. Take a moment to think about what goes into that. The cheesecake has to be made somewhere from ingredients. Some of those ingredients might be exotic ingredients such as cacao that doesn't grow anywhere near where I'm living. And the ingredients list involves plant products and animal products, which means that you have to have multiple different farms, multiple different places that produce individual ingredients, individual components. This somehow all has to get collected, processed, shipped, and end up in some form at wherever the place is that makes the cheesecake, right? Even just them getting those ingredients, that is the work of so many different people producing like primary ingredients. Some of those get shipped somewhere for further refinement and then get like packaged down, and then whoever is making the cheesecake gets these ready-made convenient ingredients and mixes them together, turns that into cheesecake. And again, some of these ingredients come from across the world. And how do they arrive there? So the technology that's needed to build the engines, the trucks, the ships, the planes, even the rubber for the tires that the truck rolls on, the refinement of crude oil into petroleum that is used to fuel all this, the logistics network that is needed, and maybe some of these products need to be refrigerated while they're being transported. The technology that goes into that is mind-boggling. The level of human coordination needed to get the cheesecake manufactured near me is incredible. And then not only that, because, hold on, how did I get this cheesecake? Oh, I whipped out my phone, which is a miracle of technology. This phone connects to invisible waves that are flying through the air of data that essentially allows me to access the world's data at my fingertips for almost free. And there I can conveniently select the flavor of cheesecake I want. The information that I want the cheesecake essentially gets sent out into space, beamed down somewhere else where someone receives that order. And the payment, also the payment technology that happens in the background, all of this is happening. It's so convenient. It's practically invisible to us. But think about everything that goes into manufacturing, the microchips, the screens, the batteries that go into the phone. Think about the satellites that are flying around to allow all this data transfer to happen, the cabling that goes into this, including underwater deep sea cables that might be involved in some of this process. The information technology in here, it's just, what I'm trying to point out is the scale of this, the scale of human coordination that makes the cheesecake order happen is absolutely incredible. So what we have accomplished here on the scale of humanity, this is what I call the miracle machine. Because I can get cheesecake and I can get pretty much anything else. I have access to so many things through this kind of technology. So through the information technology, through the network technology of the internet, and then through these vast, vast logistical networks, I can get access to stuff from wherever in the world sent to my doorstep in a way that is just absolutely mind-boggling and that would seem completely miraculous to anyone from not that long ago back to the dawn of humanity. I cannot overstate how incredible this is. And a good illustration of this is, I will link to this in the show notes in the description here. There's a video where someone made a chicken sandwich from scratch, growing and producing all the components of a chicken sandwich from scratch. And to see how long that takes and how expensive that is a good way to illustrate how incredible it is that we can just order a chicken sandwich and get one cheaply, easily, anytime, anywhere. So we have this miracle machine, this global machine that is incredibly good at creating stuff and distributing stuff. And this is amazing for everything that relates to stuff, for all the problems that are stuff dependent, of which there are many, starting with the problem of how do I survive? I need stuff, also known as food. So that's great. That's a great start. But also the building I'm sitting in is another one of those miracles of the miracle machine. All the components that came together to build this, all the technology that made this possible, and having a shelter like this, great, very important. So we have all the stuff, right? We have stuff ranging from absolute necessity to completely trivial. And the miracle machine can make basically unlimited stuff and distribute it extremely effectively. And it solves our stuff-related problems. We live in material abundance. In fact, we live in material superabundance. Unfortunately, there are many problems that cannot be addressed by stuff. And we're trying to use the miracle machine to solve those problems. For example, let's say I'm suffering from depression. The miracle machine goes, hey, do you want some cheesecake? It'll make you feel better. And I go, yeah, sure, I'll have some cheesecake. And indeed, it makes me feel better for a brief moment, but I still suffer from depression. And the miracle machine goes, well, how about more cheesecake? And in fact, the miracle machine can practically drown me in cheesecake quite affordably. But no amount of cheesecake is ever going to make me less depressed. And of course, there's more than cheesecake. The miracle machine will go, well, do you want some medication, right? Do you want some other stuff? Can I just throw stuff at you to make this problem go away? And the answer is basically no. Depression is not a problem that can be adequately addressed by any amount or any type of stuff. But this is our tendency. Our tendency is no matter what the problem is, we just try to throw stuff at it because that's what we're really good at. And of course, also because that's where all the incentives point. Of course, we are trying to solve something like depression with stuff. We're saying, well, let's find out the right kind of pill to prescribe to people to make the depression go away, because that would be incredibly good business. Not only is the miracle machine not good at solving these kinds of problems, it actually causes some of these problems, but makes some of these problems worse. So if we take mental health as an example, we have problems of depression and stress and burnout and social isolation and loneliness and many other such issues. And the overabundance of stuff and information related to stuff and information about stuff is in some cases causing and in some cases just making the problem worse. This is one of the challenges with a lot of mental health issues, that of course, when I'm suffering, when I'm feeling emotional, mental pain, I want to be distracted. I want to escape that suffering. And the miracle machine offers up so many things that at least short term soothe the pain a little bit. So it could literally be cheesecake, it could be medication, it could be various substances. It could just be distraction, entertainment, right? Doom scrolling, pornography, gambling addiction. There's so many things where I can briefly escape my current state, briefly escape my mental anguish. But of course, the more I do the substances and the gambling and the scrolling and all this other stuff, the worse my condition actually gets. This is shaping up to become an especially severe problem with loneliness and the rise of AI chatbots and AI companions. And I've made a separate video about that, which I'll link to below as well, where the miracle machine is basically going, look, we can create things. We can create the tool that makes you feel less lonely. We can create the virtual thing that makes you feel like you have a friend. And the more you engage in that kind of thing, the worse your loneliness and disconnection and isolation will become. This is increasingly the shape of our worst problems. The way I see it, we have a lot of catching up to do. And by we, I mean Wordcels specifically. I'm referring to a meme that went around for a while about shape rotators and Wordcels. Shape rotators being the kinds of people who are very technically minded, good at, shape rotation, mental challenges like on an IQ test, right? The kinds of people who are like engineers and programmers and mathematicians and stuff like that. These people are responsible for much of the miracle machine. These kinds of people, this kind of mental prowess is what puts satellites into orbit and put people on the moon and makes the cheesecake appear when I order it on my latest iPhone, which is a miracle of technology that also has become kind of boring, where it's like, oh, the latest iPhone is not as cool. It's not cool enough. It's not a cool enough upgrade, even though it's like a completely insane machine. It just shows how easily we get used to stuff, right? But anyway, all of this technology, logistics, all of this stuff is shape rotator stuff. Then there are also Wordcels, which are the kinds of people who don't have that type of intelligence, who maybe struggle with big spreadsheets and data and statistics and this kind of stuff, and who are more on the creative side, who can write a nice poem or explain things in writing or draw something beautiful, and in general have a tendency to see the world in a more holistic perspective. And it's a different type of intelligence. Both of these are legit types of important intelligence, even though obviously the shape rotator versus Wordcel idea suggests that the Wordcels are somehow worse. But I think this is in part because the shape rotators are responsible for so much of the miracle of what it is to be a human alive in the world today. And in the meantime, what have the Wordcels been doing, essentially? This is what I mean when I say we have a lot of catching up to do. Getting everyone's favorite flavor of cheesecake delivered to everyone's doorstep via the crazy miracle machine is shape rotator territory. This is a shape rotator problem. How to help people stop suffering is a Wordcel problem. If the future of humanity is going to be bright, we have to get as good at ending suffering for people who would like to stop suffering as we are at delivering cheesecake to people who would like to have cheesecake. And unfortunately, we are very far from this goal. And also, I am convinced that this is possible. We have actually a pretty good understanding of suffering and what causes it and what one can do to end it. This is not a new idea. Philosophy has been concerned with this idea for millennia, and we have really, really solid bodies of work and evidence and lineages on this topic. Personally, I lean quite Buddhist when it comes to this. I think that Buddhism contains a lot of the right frameworks and the answers to the question of why are we suffering and how can we stop. But I'm also well aware that that is not the only source of good solutions here. But although we have these answers, we really haven't done that much to get this tool, to get the solution into the hands of more people. There's a lot of work to do there, and it absolutely needs to be done, because otherwise we face this problem of absolutely drowning in stuff, to the extent where it is causing more problems than it is solving. So we are not prepared to navigate a post-scarcity world, and we are heading into a post-scarcity world at what appears to be breakneck speed, probably, maybe. And it's no wonder that we're ill-prepared for this, because for so long, the whole world has just operated on a different principle. The scarcity principle has been the dominant thing, right? The original problem is, how do I survive? How do I get enough calories? How do I get shelter? How do I stay alive? And especially once agriculture came along, it now becomes a matter of scarcity. It was like, well, I need access to fertile land, and I need more fertile land to create more calories, to create more safety for more people. But then I also need more people to defend this land, because what if my neighbor comes and steals my crops? And then it becomes this whole thing of expansion. How do I expand my empire? And you try to use access to stuff to continually expand your borders and get access to more and more stuff and be able to protect the stuff you have more and more effectively. And this has been the paradigm that most of humanity has operated on for thousands of years. All of those scarcity-based systems, all of the systems that assume I need to grab as much stuff as I can as soon as possible, are still operating. This is still what almost all of geopolitics is operating on. And it's also a coordination problem, because as long as everyone else is playing this game, then I also have to play this game. But at the same time, while the distribution is not perfect, we are racing towards a world that just doesn't look like that anymore, and where that is not a good solution anymore. Globally, playing this kind of win-lose game, playing this kind of zero-sum game, is just not going to lead to good outcomes. We desperately need to switch gears, and we are so far behind on this part of the equation. So I've talked a lot about big picture stuff, but let's bring this back to an individual perspective. So as an individual human being living your life, first of all, you have a vested interest in not suffering. You would rather have a pleasant life, a peaceful life, a good life. You would rather be thriving than suffering. And the first thing to acknowledge here is that we live in a world where the problems you're facing are not a scarcity of things, even though it often feels like that, because, like I said, our whole culture is in that paradigm. It often feels like, well, if only I had more wealth. If I had more money, that would solve my problems. I would feel better. Everything would be better. And to some degree, this is true for some people, where, sure, it's nice to have more money. And if you specifically have money problems, having more money is great. But I would say that most of us are really mistaken about this. Most of us fantasize about, if I had more money, that would solve my problems. But the truth is, it would not. Most of us are actually more like stuck in a certain kind of addiction loop with the miracle machine, where we keep consuming more stuff, but it's really more like a thing we do to numb the pain. It's not actually improving our lives. So on an individual basis, what do we need to do to rewire our thinking and realize, okay, more stuff is not the solution. More wealth is not the solution. The source of my suffering is somewhere else, and the solution is somewhere else. And in fact, an important new survival skill is, how do I deal with the overabundance of everything? How do I deal with the fact that every time I walk into a grocery store, 85% of the shelf space is dedicated to things that are very, very appealing and bad for me? That if I follow my instincts that tell me buy the big colorful packaging, buy the high sugar, high fat taste explosion thing, if I follow that instinct, it is going to make me feel worse, and it's literally going to cost me years of my life if I keep giving into this. How do I navigate this problem? How do I navigate the fact that in my pocket I have a device that can offer me endless distraction, endless entertainment and stimulation, and on which every other app is optimized to be as addictive as possible? And if I don't control this, I will waste tens of thousands of hours of my life scrolling through feeds of stuff that I will immediately forget as soon as I put down the phone. And it will cause all kinds of health issues. First of all, for my posture, because I'm too sedentary, and for my mental health, because I'm overstimulating myself, but also problems of I'm constantly comparing my life to these illusory lives of people who seem to be happier and healthier and wealthier and more beautiful and more successful than me. And what does all that do to me? And also, all of this is advertisement supported. So I'm just blasting my brain with all these advertising messages. What does that do to me? This is a challenge that we are facing, a real challenge that we're facing for our well-being and happiness. And operating on the scarcity paradigm is just making it worse. That is where the feeling of FOMO comes from, right? It's well, if I don't check my social media feeds, I'm missing out on important things. No, it's a fire hose of unlimited bullshit, most of which is basically bad for me. I should aim to miss out on as much as possible of it, but it requires some kind of a rewriting of how we see the world and how we shape our own behaviors. On an individual level, there's much we can do there. And I also happen to think that this is probably the most important thing we can do. The most important thing we can do is look at, how am I doing this? Where am I causing myself problems? Where am I stuck in the old paradigm? Where am I suffering from drowning in cheesecake? And how can I liberate myself from this? How can I masterfully navigate this world? Because we live in a world where living a great life, living a comfortable life, living a life full of beautiful experiences and the life of relative safety is so accessible. It is so possible. And we can use all of this technology, and we can use the miracle machine to make our lives better, but it doesn't happen by default. It doesn't happen if we follow our base instincts, because all of this stuff is made to exploit our base instincts. It's made to hook into our brains and get us addicted to stuff, because addiction is good business. So it's almost like, instead of having to learn to survive in the jungle, we have to learn to survive in this era of overabundance and overstimulation. And the more I can do that for myself, the more it improves my own well-being, it improves my own life, but also the more it turns me into a good role model for everyone around me. I believe that role modeling is the most important way to learn and teach. We learn from role models. We learn by seeing what other people are doing. We learn implicitly without actively thinking, I'm going to read a book about this and take notes and try to learn this. Most of our learning is just based off of what we see other people do, how we see other people existing in the world. This is obviously especially important when we're younger, but I think it keeps going on, right? The people around you shape you to a very, very significant degree. So the most important thing you can do if you want to contribute to solving all of these problems I've laid out is solve these problems for yourself. Become yourself better at masterfully surfing the wave of superabundance, shifting your priorities towards stuff that actually matters, such as your mental well-being, your physical health, your relational health, the way you relate to other people, the way you deal with your own emotions, and so on. If you can become someone who thrives in this world, other people will take notice, and you will automatically be helping other people level up themselves by doing the work on yourself first. This is also my plan this is what I'm trying to do with my content and also with my life, is I am trying to become a better role model myself, and I'm trying to help other people become better role models. For me, this is the grassroots way to fix the problem. And I'm not into high-level geopolitics. I'm not going to run for office and try to solve the problem that way. I am into one person at a time. I'm into starting with the individual and spreading that out to social groups, families, communities, and so on. I think that is where, as an individual, we have the greatest leverage point to make a difference in the world. It seems clear to me that the times are calling for a change. We are called to show up differently. We are called to adapt to the new world and to be ready for a future that looks probably like what we have now, but more extreme. We will not do well if we just keep operating on the previous models, if we keep operating on what has worked so far. We are being asked to step up. And this is my attempt to contribute. So a lot of the content I've made recently is about that. And I will link to maybe one of the most important pieces related to this is about communication, about how to level up your communication style. Because from what I see, there are two games that are usually proposed when it comes to communicating, both of which are losing games. And you can make the choice to level up to a winning game when it comes to how you communicate with people. But it's exactly one of those things, like it requires that kind of leadership. It requires that someone does this, starts demonstrating this, starts living this so other people can see it and go, oh, this is way better than what I've been doing. I want to join in. And I think this is also one of the most important shifts, away from a focus on stuff and towards a focus on relationship, on community, on connection. That is one of the ways in which we can learn how to thrive in this environment. So that is the big idea. We are heading into a world of post-scarcity, a world of superabundance. We're very poorly prepared for it. We need to do a lot of work to make the ending of suffering, the cessation of suffering, as available to people who want to stop suffering, as cheesecake is available to people who want cheesecake. And this is the work I'm here to do. If you want to learn more about this, check out the other links in the description. And also, if you want to join me on this, I will link to my newsletter where you can sign up and see what comes next. That is all for today. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll catch you in the next one.